Okay, you are live.
Thank you, Krista, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call our meeting to order. Welcome to all of you. I've heard you speak, so I know you're all good for that. And as we always do, I would like to acknowledge that the Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. So as I said, welcome to everyone. We'll move right along. And the first item of business is the approval of the minutes that have been circulated to you. So could I have a motion to accept them or to amend them?
I so move.
So moved by Councillor Stoddard that the minutes be approved as presented. Could I have a seconder? Seconded by Haneen. All those in favor say aye or wave your hand. I see hands. Approved. Okay, the next item of business is the order of business. And I think I alerted you to the fact that after speaking with Charlene and Heidi, we decided that it would be appropriate to reverse the order of those presentations. And so that's reversing the order of items 8.3.1 and 8.3.2. I wonder if anyone may be prepared to make that motion to amend the order of business. Haneen, are you indicating that you're going to make that amendment? Can I have a seconder?
I can second.
Iona would second that. Again, all in favor indicate by waving your hand or saying aye. All right, approved. Thank you very much. With regard to item number 4, I don't believe there's any business arising out of the minutes. So that brings us to number 5. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Having seen the agenda and knowing what we're going to speak about, any conflict of interest? There being none, then we'll move on to item 6. As far as I know, there are no motions for rescission. And so that brings us to item number 7, which is the consideration of deferred business. And at this point, committee members, it's your opportunity to suggest or have us begin to think about next steps that we as a committee might take in response to the presentations that we've heard from the climate emergency presentations for the past 3 meetings. I'm just wondering, I'll just open it up to you. Anybody have anything they would like to bring to the table with regard to this issue? Lily.
Thank you. I think it would be really great if we were able to, encourage or recommend to council to or share our support for fully implementing Halifax 2050 and fully, and putting the budget towards Halifax 2050. And also, with that, encourage that that in the implementation of Halifax 2050, that the disproportionate impacts of the climate crisis on women and children and are considered and mitigated as much as possible. Yeah, and I'm sure there will be discussion over how we could do that, but I think that it would be great if we were able to voice our support in advance of the budget vote in, I think it's in March, mid-March. I could be corrected, but just say that we support. I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone here, but I should hope that we as a committee support the implementation of Halifax.
So Lily, could I just clarify? So are you suggesting that you might like to make a motion that our committee support Halifax and encourage the HRM Council to grant its funding requests?
Yes.
Am I putting words in your mouth, or is that what you, yeah?
Yeah, I would say fully implement it, including providing the necessary funding.
So fully implemented. So I'll just open it for a little bit of discussion, and then we can maybe go back to stating it as a more formal motion. Anyone else want to speak to this or support Lily or?
Let's speak.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lily, for putting that forward. I can let you know that when the vote was taken for Halifax, there was only one objection. So I think council is very much in favor of pushing this through. I think as a group, though, it might be nice for you to just send your support. I couldn't help you write it, but you could, just something to say you support it and you hope that they will go through with the budget plan for that.
Okay, anyone else wish to speak? Joanne?
Yeah, and perhaps the counselor knows more about this, but I fully support Lily in fully funding the climate action plan, because right now, like I've been talking to some people, and apparently it's like 20% where we're supposed to be right now. So to me, that says it's not being taken seriously. And I feel like it's not even time to break it down and say, these are the important things for women, because we're so far from being where we need to be in it. People are really worried that that it's a PR thing and that Halifax is not taking it seriously. I can't say that. Well, I suppose I could, but that's like pretty strong feelings about it. It's pretty serious.
So Joanne, if I hear you correctly, what you're suggesting is that you really like the wording fully funded in there.
Yes,
because
exactly.
what you're worried about, what you're hearing is that it's not being what you would say fully funded.
Well, it's nowhere near, and Councillor Stoddard may be able to add to this, but I have heard that it's, hang on, I will just check. It's 20% on track from where it should be, and it's 14% resourced, and that's just to date. So we're not even talking about long-term goals. Yeah, it needs to be taken seriously and fully funded for at least where we're at now.
I can tell you that HRM Council is taking it seriously, and that's why they want to put through the 3%. And to forgive me, but I forget what the ultimate goal is, but they want to start somewhere. And as far as I'm concerned, this is towards the future. We can't just look at what's happening present day, but we have grandchildren, we have nieces and nephews, and we want to make I won't even say the city, I'll say, the country as clean as possible. And we have to look in our own backyards. And I think this is a great way of doing so. I think the quote was, for every dollar we put into it now, we'll save 6 in 10 years. I'm sorry, I should have wrote down the exact numbers, but basically investing now will help us in the future. I mean, we're a coastal coastal province. We have a lot to look at. The sea level rises, our forests. Anyway, I could go on and on, but they are taking it seriously.
Anyone else want to jump in here? So Councillor Stoddard and Lily, you can maybe help me understand the budget process. So I'm thinking about our meeting today and us having something to say prior to the budget. Do we need to do that at this meeting? That's my question. And if we do, then we should work at trying to formulate a motion for this meeting.
If I may.
Please, yeah.
Budget will be finalized April 12th. And between now and then, we're getting comments, letters, emails from the public So up until I'd say the end of March-ish, they'll be accepting letters and emails through the clerk's office, handwritten, dropped off, emailed, because they were looking at the final budget, all the numbers, April 12th.
Okay.
Nothing is set in stone yet, but like I said, I'm pretty sure the 3% will go forward for Halifax.
Okay. So that suggests to me, I mean, it's a bit late, but our next meeting is April 7th.
Mm,
So if we want that, I think we have two options here. We can either try to formulate a motion right now, formalize that, Lily, and get a seconder and vote on it, or we get that fed into the system now, or we can leave it and develop that motion a little more carefully, craft a little more carefully, and vote on it on our April meeting.
mhm.
Lily, since you brought this forward, what's your preference?
Well, Krista very nicely just formulated a potential motion in the chat.
Yeah, we're
Yay,
changing
Krista.
just a little bit to say impacts of climate change on, hold on, I'm gonna put the word in. Just trying to fix it a little bit.
I think we should vote on it today. We should put a motion for
Yeah,
it.
thank you, Krista. You're helping us a lot here. This is great.
I mean, if there are no other comments from folks, I'm willing to put forward the motion.
It sounds, Lily, to me like there's support here amongst your peers. So I think it's just an issue of wording.
Okay, well, I move that the Women's Advisory Committee recommend that the Executive Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council fully fund and implement Halifax, and that the disproportionate impacts of climate change on women and children are considered and mitigated.
Second.
Thank you. Moved by Lily and seconded by Councillor Stoddard. Are you ready to vote? Are you ready for the question?
Question?
Okay. All those in favor indicate by saying aye or
Aye.
waving your hand. Motion is carried. Thank you. You know, I apologize. I neglected to say at the beginning of the meeting that I received regrets from Councillor Blackburn and from Tanya Boudreau. So I've received regrets from those two members. And I believe that Holly and Christine will be joining us, but they'll be a little bit late. So my apologies for that. Anyways, thank you, Lily, for your initiative on this. You've really led the way with ensuring that we had speakers that we heard from, and now with this motion, good for you. Thank you. Okay, that brings us, are there any other motions? I should just ask. Anything else that someone wanted to address with regard to the climate emergency? I think that's a pretty good step. Well, what do you think, Haneen? Haneen's always our one who wants us moving forward on things. Yeah, we're good. All right. Let's see, correspondence, petitions, and delegations. Krista, do we have any?
Madam Clerk, we have no correspondence and we have not received any petitions through the clerk's office.
All right. And did you just see a message from Holly? Or is it just me that's getting a message from Holly?
Yes, there's one that's coming in and just said joining late.
Okay.
So just, yeah.
Okay. Item 8.2, any petitions? Krista, are there any petitions?
There are no petitions.
Okay, thank you. So that brings us to item 8.3 and 3.1. And I now ask Charlene Gagnon, who is the manager of advocacy research and new initiatives with the Halifax YWCA's program that addresses human trafficking, to lead us in a presentation. Are you there, Charlene? She was with us.
Sorry, that's on me. I had to promote her.
Okay. All right.
I am here
Char-
now.
Yeah, Charlene,
Yeah.
were you able to hear me?
Yes, I am.
Yes. So I'm welcome to our meeting. You've had a chance to say hello to some of our committee members and some of our staff members. We're very pleased that you're able to join us. Looking forward to your presentation. I'm going to keep you on time, not let you go past 20 minutes, and then there'll be some opportunities for questions. So over to you.
Okay, great. And someone else is running the slides, is my understanding.
Yes, bear with me.
Yeah, no problem. I will do my best to keep on time. This is a very complex topic to be talking about, as I'm sure you can all appreciate. We typically do intro trainings over 5 hours. So to fit it into 20 minutes, I tried to present, to put together a presentation that really just looks at doing some myth busting around the topic of human trafficking, because of course it is a very salacious kind of topic, and there's lots of thoughts and ideas around what it is and what it isn't here in Halifax and how it happens domestically. So I'm going to, as soon as my slide deck comes up, go through.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just experiencing a little bit of technical difficulties on this end, just getting the PowerPoint to upload.
No problem.
It's coming up now, but it's very slow.
Okay, hopefully this won't come off my 20 minutes.
No,
Absolutely not.
no, we can handle it. We
Great.
can handle it. Yeah.
Great. Clock's not starting yet.
No. No, we're good. These kind of meetings are always a little bit challenging.
Well, soon we'll be all in person again.
Yeah, it'd be great.
And then we'll have the technical difficulties like in real time.
Yeah. So while we're waiting, Crystal just give me a heads up when we were starting. I am away from Halifax. I understand there's a storm there. Is that right?
Yes, indeed. It has been snowing all day.
Has it? Oh my gosh. Well, hopefully our neighbors are shoveling for us. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, maybe while we're waiting, I can just give a little bit of context of
Sure.
the project too, because the presentation is really just focused on the issue. So just to let everybody know, I'm the manager of advocacy research and new initiatives at YWCA Halifax, and working on the systemic responses to human trafficking and what we call commercial sexual exploitation of children and youth. Sexual exploitation can happen outside of a trafficking context as well. So we try to really encompass all of the different ways that sexual exploitation is happening to particularly our youth in this province. Our TESS partnership, which Amy is a member of, is a provincial interagency partnership. We have about 70 agencies represented from across Nova Scotia, and everyone from government to community to police and law enforcement to prosecutions who are sitting on that committee to really try and, we spent a lot of the first time really trying to figure out what it is that we're actually talking about. And now we're in the phase of community mobilization around the issue. So we're doing a lot of awareness campaigns and also training of service providers, and really doing some of the on the ground work that needs to be done to address the root causes of the issue. We're much more interested in taking it upstream and dealing with prevention, and really trying to adopt a public health approach to the issue, rather than always talking about it in the justice context as it often comes up. So you can advance to the next slide. I just want to mention that this is a bit of a sensitive topic. We're talking about one of the most extreme forms of gender-based violence in our society right now, and we're all coming to the table with various levels of lived experience that may or may not be part of our professional careers, but we always like to acknowledge that, if anyone's having difficulty with any of the content that we're talking about here today, feel free to just do some grounding techniques and breathe. And if anyone wants to debrief with me at any time, the email address to reach me will be available at the end. Next slide. So on this slide, I kind of have, like, on the one hand, those misconceptions, the myths, and then on the other hand, trying to unpack those myths a bit and looking at it for the context of Nova Scotia and Canada. When people hear the term human trafficking, most of them think this is a issue that involves crossing of international borders. In fact, in Canada, the majority of human trafficking that happens is domestic, which means it is happening within our communities and across our provincial borders, within the context, like within the country as a whole. It's often portrayed, many of you have probably seen that movie Taken, the bane of our existence, which really presents this issue of human trafficking as it's strangers. People are getting trunked and kidnapped, and the white van, all of those rumors about the white vans going around scooping people up off the street plays into it. It's always a white van too. I never quite understand why that is, but the way that it's portrayed in pop culture and in the media sometimes is really presenting this issue that this is strangers, this is people getting scooped up off the street. And in Canada, and particularly in Nova Scotia, the majority of victims have existing relationships with the people who are trafficking them. And we're going to go into each one of these a little bit more in depth as I go. And then the other thing that I want to address today is this idea that all traffickers, like the gender and the backgrounds of both perpetrators and victims. It's often thought that all traffickers are male and all victims are female. And there's certain assumptions that come about the people who are involved, whether it's on the perpetration side or on the victimization side. And really in Nova Scotia, we're trying to take a holistic approach to the issue, and really recognizing all of the points of intersectionality and oppression that come into play when it comes into this topic. Next slide. So we're going to start with this idea that the one point of it, that the majority of human trafficking that happens in Canada is domestic. So what does that mean for Halifax specifically in Nova Scotia? You can advance to the next slide. So it is definitely happening here. The most recent Statistics Canada report that came out from police reported data is that Nova Scotia, in fact, has the highest per capita rate of human trafficking in the country. Here for the 2019 numbers, because of course police reported statistics come out a couple years later after the fact, is 5.2 cases per 100,000. These 5.2 cases would include instances of labor trafficking as well, like forced labor trafficking. This isn't all just sexualized human trafficking, but it's still pretty high for being such a small province. A lot of people think it's only happening in Halifax. It is absolutely not only happening in Halifax. I know my colleague Heidi Marshall will be talking a little bit about the Indigenous context and what's happening in Sydney as well, but it's also happening in rural communities. We're hearing about it in Truro, in Bridgewater, in Yarmouth, in Kentville. It's happening all over the province. We do not here in Halifax or Nova Scotia have what we would consider a legal sex trade. And what we mean by that is we have no strip clubs operating in the whole province. The last strip club that was operating would have been Ralph's Place over here in Dartmouth, which of course burned down by fire. And because of the bylaws that HRM has put in place about such establishments reopening, no strip clubs can reopen within the city limits. But that also means that, for the closest places to dance is Moncton. So that means that it's often the first stop along the way. And they often say that if you can make money in Moncton, you can make money anywhere. So there is a known identified trafficking corridor between Nova Scotia and Moncton, New Brunswick. Which is well used to kind of trial people out in terms of getting them engaged and involved. In Nova Scotia, it's a mix of adults and youth, independents and third-party controlled, street and survival-based engagement, as well as empowered engagement. It's happening in all different types of forms, and it disproportionately affects the African, Nova Scotian, Indigenous, and 2S LGBTQ+ communities, also newcomer communities as well, though we don't really do a lot of work around the forced labor trafficking. We really do stay focused on this, so I can't really speak to the extent that it's happening within that community. Next slide. Sorry, I'm trying to get everything in the 20 minutes. I'm trying to be a minute a slide. So, you know, a lot of people ask, well, why is it happening so much here, right? And I think, you know, we don't really have the answer to that question. I think poverty, you know, all of those social indicators of health and wellness of communities definitely comes into play. We do have high rates of child poverty. You know, there's all kinds of intersecting factors that comes in to put people at greater risk, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But I think it's important to recognize that, you know, Halifax is a port city. We've been host to sailors and seamen from around the world for it's embedded in our history, and also embedded in our cultures. We have a bit of a party town reputation. You know, they said when in Ada McCallum's day, for those of you who may remember, Halifax's most infamous madam, who was in fact a pimp, was, you know, celebrated as a female entrepreneur in the city, and people, she was world renowned. It was said that it was written on the bathroom stalls in Russia, for a good time when you're in Halifax, call Ada. So, you know, I think that we have this long-standing cultural tradition of being a party town, having fun, and that's all wrapped up with this kind of mystique of what the sex trade is, generally speaking, from a cultural point of view. Some of you will remember in 1992, there was a major juvenile prostitution bust in that involved many girls from Nova Scotia. It was documented in the book Somebody's Daughter by Phonse Jessam. And it was at that point that really the systemic responses to the issue started really coming into play. It was interesting. I know Kit Waters really well, and she was on that task force that was initially formed and sent me the report from 1993 that came out of that. And it's really interesting to see that, you know, a lot of those recommendations that were made back in the 1990s are ones that we're working on now. So, you know, we're really trying to keep the momentum going so that we don't end up 10 years from now revisiting this issue and being like, oh, we got to start all over from the beginning again and try and address it. Next slide. So the other piece is the majority of victims know and have a relationship with their trafficker. So this is very true. You know, it's not strangers. You can advance to the next slide. You know, there are handbooks that people can download from online. You can order a book off of Amazon that's basically called Pimpology 101. It is a methodical, strategic tactic that essentially predators look for vulnerabilities in people, and particularly youth, of course, because youth are very vulnerable, generally speaking anyway, and kind of implement these tactics in a very methodical way that's well documented in research and in law enforcement circles, not only here in Canada, but across the planet, across the globe, essentially. And what this is really getting into somebody's life, getting in their head, being becoming a trusted person in their life, really listening to them, honing in on their needs, filling all of those needs, whether those needs are material or emotional needs that are being filled, coupling that with introducing them to a subculture and a community that's very fast-paced and, you know, in the beginning can be very fun and partying and lots of alcohol and you know, for youth getting away from family homes and all of that kind of stuff. And it really does create this community sense, which becomes a subculture and they're othered really from the rest of mainstream society and culture. And once they're embedded and entrenched in that life, it's really, really hard for folks to make a shift because often it's really great at first for folks. It isn't until later on that some of the violence starts to happen, and when people really start to feel that they're kind of like trapped in the situation and not really having many other options. So these are a couple of the tactics that are specifically used, but if you go to the next slide, this is really the game, right? So the luring piece is really predators will identify individuals who are vulnerable. So they'll look for those vulnerabilities. There's a reason why perpetrators kind of sit outside the group homes in the city, kids and child welfare, homeless shelters, predators are in these locations where there are high concentrations of highly vulnerable people, and they look for the folks who are most vulnerable in order to really, because they're the ones who are going to be most easily kind of manipulated into this because you're offering them a better life, or you're telling them it's going to be a better life. And that's where the grooming comes in. It's really this relationship that's formed between the victim and perpetrator. It might be through romance. It might also be through friendship or mentorship. It doesn't always have to happen through a romance lens. We know peer recruiting is a thing too, where folks who are engaged are kind of like, look at this bag I got, and it's so easy to do this. And it just kind of falls all into place. And there's this, lots of promises made for the future. There's love bombing happening. There's an intense need fulfillment. So now that bond has been formed. And then in the recruitment phase, it's kind of like you start to soften people up. So this, when I mentioned that going to Moncton to dance first, that might be one of the ways that people are recruited as, I just spent all of this money on you, on your hair, on your nails. Now I'm broke. You need to go make some money. And I have an easy way you can make this money. So the idea of participating in the sex trade is introduced to the individual, the harms are minimized, and that material reward is amplified. And then once they start, engaging, that's when the sexual exploitation happens. Isolation, it's very similar to the cycles of relational violence we see in intimate partner violence as well. There's a lot of similarities. And then they take control of the working conditions and money. Next slide. Really important to note around this piece, and you'll see on this next slide some visuals that are often used in association with some anti-trafficking work, which we really try to combat in the work that we do. Next slide. These images of people being handcuffed and bound. And, I always say the dirty mattress is the prop of stock photography for human trafficking, visual campaigns, right? Because people don't see themselves in this. The people who are going through this and experiencing this is not their experience. This is not what they're seeing. They actually believe they've chosen. They don't understand that they've kind of been put through the ringer with the psychological manipulation and tactics. And they actually believe that they've made the choice. And so next slide. One of the ways we try to understand like how choice plays out early in our partnership work, we had to unpack this issue of choice. Like, what does choice even mean in the sex trade? So we created this, what we call our spectrum of choice, in all of the ways that people may choose to participate in the sex trade. And it does run the gamut from that no choice, which is someone being kidnapped, bound, gagged, forced, which does absolutely happen. It doesn't happen as much as pop culture would have you believe that it happens, but it does definitely happen. Based on the last police reported statistics, probably about anywhere from 5 to 10% of the cases of human trafficking in Canada is this no choice, this slavery based model. But when you look at the other ways, when it comes to youth in particular and vulnerable folks, this perceived choice category is really where we see a lot of stuff happening. So, people have made the choice. They have said, I am going to do this. Nobody is kind of like, tying them up or putting a gun to their head and forcing them to do it, but they don't necessarily understand that they've really been manipulated and put through this strategy of and military grade psychological manipulation tactics in order to get them to make that choice themselves. This is still human trafficking. It's one of the reasons why human trafficking is really difficult to address in a criminal justice framework, because you need to have somebody who will come forward and say, I'm being human trafficked. And the majority of people don't actually understand that the choices that they have made have really come from these, tactics of manipulation by folks. And then when you get to kind of the other end of the spectrum, when we're talking about situational choice and apparent choice and evident choice, this is where there's likely not a third party who's in control of the situation, but there are other third parties that are definitely kind of still around, hovering around. And this type of engagement is really around exploitation based on lack of basic needs, lack of vulnerability. I need to do this because I need to feed myself. I need to pay my rent. Right now, we done our Hearing Them survey, which was we have 140 respondents, and we'll be looking at that data and analyzing it. But, I'm just over halfway through entering that in. And what's really concerning is the number of people who are reporting that landlords are really the exploiter, especially as it comes to the housing related issue. And especially now with these, what's happening through COVID and the housing crisis in Nova Scotia, that vulnerability around lack of housing becomes a point of exploitation for folks, where they might not be being pimped, so to speak, but they are still being exploited by people in positions of power who have that over them, who have something that they need, and who are making those requests in order for them to get those needs filled. Next slide. And the last point I just want to make is around, who are the traffickers? Who are the victims? Traffickers and victims can really they can be any gender, and they can be from any background. If you want to advance the slide. On the trafficker side of things, it's really important to note, if you ask any law enforcement officer, like, who's a pimp, they won't be able to tell you what a pimp looks like. There's no profile of a pimp. There's no appearance. A pimp can be a man, a woman, a family member. They can be any gender. They can be any age. They can be older. They can be peers. They can be from any community. They can have any color of skin, often in some of these anti-trafficking campaigns, and also in pop culture. The trafficker is portrayed as being a man of color, an older man of color, and that is just simply false. And we really try to stress this point, because if we have tunnel vision and let our stereotypes and biases and some of that cultural influence interfere with how we're interpreting things as we're trying to figure out, is this happening, isn't this happening, it can be really damaging to everybody who's involved, really. It's also really important to note that some perpetrators have been groomed into the business. They have no other options in terms of economic security of themselves. So in some cases it's familial. In some cases, the motivations behind getting into this are sometimes very similar to the motivations of some of the very vulnerable people who get involved on the other side of things. And again, that's not to say that we're like rationalizing or justifying this very heinous crime, but it's just to note that if we are going to take a holistic approach, we have to address the underlying systemic racism factors and poverty factors and all of those other factors that are coming into play that are making this such a big issue for here in the province. Next slide. So who is at risk? This is our kind of cheeky slide here. If you read through this list, under 18 years old, has a cell phone, one social media account, likes consumer goods, spends unsupervised time, like all of these things are, if you click the little joke will come up. We're basically talking about all youth. If you click and advance through the slide, like, we always start here when we're talking about risk. It's important to recognize that actually all youth are at risk just because of the inherent vulnerabilities that they have for being youth, especially being youth in like 2022, which is sometimes hard for us older folks to wrap our heads around. But next slide, there are definitely other things, right? So all youth are at risk, but risk also depends on individual factors. So these are the events in or characteristics of an individual's life, their family background, were they involved in child welfare? What are those individual factors that are coming into play that's increasing their risk? The environmental factors, so these are the things that come from the youth's neighborhood or community, their school background. Are they getting bullied at school? Are they not connected in with, do they not have social support circles wrapped around them? Do they not have safe spaces to be? And then of course, those social factors, which are basically the basic societal factors that are set up in our culture, which in some ways promotes sexual exploitation and sexual violence. And next slide, and then you see this handy Venn diagram on the next slide to look at where's the highest risk, right? So when you take all of these kind of like individual risk factors for folks and then compile them on top of those social and systemic vulnerabilities, we're talking intersectionality here, which I'm sure everybody within this committee is very well versed in. This definitely comes into play here, right? So we always have to look at ways, and especially if we're talking about, as our partner with the RCMP, Dave Lane always says, we're not going to arrest our way out of this situation. This is about actually looking at a lot of those underlying root cause factors and getting at the heart of things. So addressing some of those, both things that put people at individual risk, but also the social and systemic underlying factors, which makes that risk even riskier, if that makes sense. And with the next slide, we can see that means that at highest risk, what we found here in Nova Scotia, based on a lot of research we've done and talking to partners and who we see as being most highly represented within the population of folks who are engaged. People, this says youth here, but even people, even adults that we see who may have come into the sex trade from a place of exploitation. So they were under the age of 18 when they started. They probably had someone who was influencing their decision to participate, but now they're in their 30s and 40s, and this is just the way of life and the only thing that they know. So while they're no longer being controlled, and they are in control of their money and circumstances, they have a lot of these risk factors, and these risk factors were the same things that brought them into the sex trade, that we would consider to be a trafficking victim, with quotes around it, would be. So that would be people with a history of adverse childhood experiences. The homeless youth population, highly, highly vulnerable. The whole of the homeless population is highly vulnerable to this issue. Youth in care right now, as I said, like preliminarily, I can say that we're looking at about 50% of the folks who are currently engaged in the sex trade or formerly have been in Nova Scotia have been in the child welfare system in some capacity. Youth living in isolated communities, whether that's geographically isolated or culturally isolated communities, that can increase someone's risk and put them in that highest risk category. If you drop out of school, you don't have those kind of protective pro-social factors, those positive communities wrapped around you, the supports to maybe be able to access your floating out on your own and be in, that when you're kind of separated away as kind of like an individual, that can place you at really high risk. And of course, people with low self-esteem, body image issues, all of that kind of stuff, that's going to play into it, because part of it is really wanting to feel loved and wanting to feel wanted. That's a big part of how people get involved. And of course, Heidi is going to speak to the issues around, of course, Indigenous folks are at super high risk in Nova Scotia, and she'll get a bit more into depth in that after me. And I think this is the last slide. Oh, no, wait, the one other thing I want to talk about is in terms of warning signs, because that's another thing a lot of people ask about is what should we be looking out for? Key point, perpetrators of commercial sexual exploitation, they seek out these vulnerabilities and exploit them. Sometimes when we're talking about the social media stuff, right? Like I look at social media sometimes and I'm like, oh my God, these kids are putting out so many of their vulnerabilities like right there, and online has become the #1 place of recruitment, luring and recruitment for perpetrators, especially since COVID-19, and everybody has moved online and is just kind of like living online now. So, that's why we often have extra training components too around online safety and stuff like that. So next slide. Warning signs. So these are some things that you might want to keep an eye out for. These are what we kind of train service providers on. We say that these are your service provider spidey senses. These are the types of things that if you notice them happening, it might not be trafficking, it could be something else, but definitely warrants a conversation to be opened and to start really building those relationships with the youth that folks are working with. Those regular out-of-town trips, you notice someone's going to Moncton quite a bit, and they don't have the money to kind of like pay for those trips to Moncton, big red flag. Or they're going to Toronto, for the weekend, or if they're from rural and they're coming into Halifax with getting a hotel room for the weekend. That travel, that moving around, that's part of the lifestyle, right? So that's a red flag to look out for. Any evidence of a controlling friend or romantic partner coupled with the fear of kind of like disappointing that person or displeasing that person. Again, this could be an intimate partner violence situation or something else, but definitely warrants having a conversation if you notice that kind of really hyper controlling behavior and this almost fear response from somebody about keeping in contact with that person and making sure that they're okay with what you're doing. Excessive secrecy about activities, online presence. This with the online stuff, if the having a relationship with somebody that you've never met online. And I know this is actually, there's a lot of things around this, not just in terms of human trafficking. This is a red flag for a lot of stuff. I think often about, even senior women who are lonely, and just there's so many different types of predatory behaviors out there when it comes to online, and really targeting people's vulnerability and need for love and belonging, that is really just being used against them. So anytime somebody, anyone you love even kind of says to you, I have this person that I met online and I love them and they love me, and there's this like intense love and you haven't even met the person, that's a bit of a red flag. So warrants definitely a conversation to try and get some more information. Again, any kind of excessive material possessions or getting gel nails done like every week, or getting your hair done every week. Like I'm a professional who's making good money and I can't afford to have that done every week, right? So it's always about matching what you see as a lifestyle with an individual who is vulnerable, is coming from maybe a place of poverty, and what they have in terms of those material items or for personal grooming and stuff like that. We do know in Nova Scotia, sometimes people are branded or tattooed. So, people have tattoos all the time. We say the thing to look out for is if someone comes and they have a new tattoo, maybe it's someone's name, their partner's name, and they don't want to talk about it. Like, right? I have tons of tattoos. I know lots of people with tattoos. Generally, if you have a tattoo and someone asks you about that tattoo, they're going to tell you the significance behind it, the meaning, who the artist was. If you notice someone who has a new tattoo that's somebody's name or looks like a logo or a brand, and you ask them about it and they don't want to talk about it, or they're hiding it and they're kind of shameful around it, that could be a red flag. And of course, if they have a second working bag, which is a bag they take to go to dates with safe sex supplies, lube, lingerie, that kind of stuff, that's a big red flag. I would say, if someone has a working bag that they're carrying along with their other purse. Next slide. How am I doing? I'm doing good for time, because this is my last slide. Am I perfect? Am I right on it?
Yeah, this is the last slide.
Sweet.
You're a bit over, but I didn't
Okay.
want to cut. I didn't want to cut
Okay.
off that last discussion.
Okay, so long as I'm hoping there'll still be a bit of time for questions if anyone
Yes.
has any. But just to let everyone know, we are on social media as part of our awareness and community mobilization kind of outcomes. We have a Twitter, we have a Facebook, we have an Instagram, that just kind of like a rolling information about, when new cases come up, and also trainings that we offer and different resources that may be available from partners from across the country. And then we also just launched this month a new website, which is tessns.com, which has basically, it's like the go-to place for anything information related, or connecting with us, how to connect with us. So there, I'm done.
Thank you, Charlene. That was a very informative and disturbing presentation, but very informative. I don't know if Haneen is still with us. Haneen, would you like an opportunity to comment or question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a question. So what I realized from your presentation is a lot of this really goes down to systemic issues of housing, child apprehension, group homes, and those are all, they tend to be provincial issues.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, what do you think the municipality itself can do to address this concern?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there are definitely those systemic issues. And I think like some of the work that's being done around housing right now, from the municipal government, like that's going to be super important and key and important, but also ensuring that, the solutions that we're coming up with are safe for people as well. We have to be very, very careful around knowing that, when there are high concentrations of extremely vulnerable people put together, that can be kind of like a grounds for predators who know to come. So if that is going to be kind of the way, then we need to recognize that this is a possibility and have safeguards in place, in order to make sure that the folks who are staying in those spaces are as safe as possible, and that we're looking for it, right? Like that's a big part of it too. So making sure the staff who are there understand what it is and are looking for it, so that if their spidey senses start to go off. And the other big thing is, of course, around policing. As I say, there's definitely the systemic pieces of it, but the immediate response, like police are incredible partners for us in this, because service providers aren't going to be going after the predators. That is the role of the police. And so we have a really good relationship with the vice unit within the police, and of course the RCMP human trafficking unit, who do take the extra time to get trained, to find out about best practice, to think about a victim-centered approach to policing, which is amazing. The issue, but it's like 4 or 5 people within the unit, right? So making sure that on the policing side of things, all officers are receiving the same level of information and training about it. We have a lot of work to do to bridge the trust between the police and this population. A lot of work to do. And some of those systemic issues come into that, in terms of, some of the stuff that we know happens that we're all trying to address and figure out how to deal with anyway. In the case of this particular, and all gender-based violence, really, it's the same stuff about people coming forward to report sexual assaults. Like there's a reason why most gender-based violence goes unreported. So how can we build a police force here in the city that is really a champion for victims of all forms of gender-based violence? I would say those would be the two big things, especially around housing and around policing, for this, where the city's role is. And of course, like I said, Amy is part with the UN, and I know they're looking at some models from other parts of the country right now that we might be able to adapt and bring to the city. I think it's really important to just be aware of it, know about it, and figure out how we can address it. So those would be my thoughts around that.
Okay, thank
I hope
you.
that's helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks to both of you. We'll move on. Lily, do you have any comments or questions?
I don't have any questions, but thank you for sharing this information with us today. It was very informative, and definitely be thinking about lots might have questions at a later time. So I appreciate that you shared your contact info.
Thank you.
And Joanne?
No questions, but just as well, thanks very much, Charlene. It was a really good presentation, very informative. Thank you.
Thank you. Holly, anything from you? Any comments or questions?
Thank you for the presentation. Definitely almost too much to think about.
I know.
Curious, Charlene, of any jurisdictions that are doing really effective policies between municipality and police. And like, I know our rates in Nova Scotia and in Canada are growing and not in a great way. So are there jurisdictions that are having success? I was really impressed with all the education and the outreach on the website. And I think that's the modules and some of the upcoming pieces I'm actually curious in taking part in to learn more myself, but also, you know, knowing that, like you said, those supportive policies with policing agencies. Is there anybody doing a really good job that we could learn from or learn more from to help with some internal advocacy or other opportunities? Thank you.
For sure. I think, you know, I think we shouldn't sell ourselves short here in Nova Scotia with what we're doing. We're actually doing some groundbreaking work here in Nova Scotia on this topic and on the partnership and kind of making those connections between community and policing. And I think there's a reason our rates are increasing. It's because we're working together and people are feeling more comfortable to come forward to report, right? I don't think those increasing rates mean that it's happening more here. I think it just means that more people are feeling okay to come forward. But I also would ask Amy to maybe share about some of the stuff she's doing, because around the City of London, and I'm just getting kind of read in on these programs now, but Amy's been doing a lot of work and consultation with London, Ontario, and the model they're using there. So I guess maybe you can chat with Amy later, or she can loop y'all in later. Yeah.
And I just want to say, we did have an opportunity to, Amy set that up for us so that we could hear about what was happening in London. And I'm thinking maybe Holly was wondering if you knew of others besides London.
Yeah, I mean, the City of Niagara has been doing some stuff too. They have kind of like a triage again down in the States. Interesting. A woman by the name of Manal Patel, Manal Patel, was brought up by Status of Women, and she is with the City of Houston, Municipal City of Houston, and they actually have a human trafficking department embedded right in the City of Houston. So it's right embedded within the mayor's office. It's the only jurisdiction anywhere, I think, in North America that has such a position. And of course, in Texas, a lot of it's both forced labor trafficking as well as sexualized human trafficking. And they have a great website. They have a lot of great materials. She came up. We've done a lot of cross-border meetings, and we have a great relationship too with the U.S. consulate. So there's opportunities to do some cross-border collaboration too. If folks would be interested in kind of looking at what that City of Houston model is, could definitely reach out. It has been almost 2 years since we've connected with Manal, so it'd be interesting to see how that that department is doing now. But yeah, it's one of the only jurisdictions where they have said this is a problem for our city, and we are making it a priority by creating this whole strategy and office from within the city.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stoddard, do you have any comments or questions?
I'd like to thank you for the presentation, especially the facts and that a lot of people assume. Like they always think it's, you know, a young lady that's, you know, bored or thinks she has nothing else to do, but they don't realize the mental behind the scenes issue. You know, I think fathers play a lot in this too, because they need to give their daughters attention, positive attention, so that somebody doesn't come along and say, oh, you know, oh, let me hug you, let me do this, let me do that for you. And I told my son, actually, I said, make sure that you give flowers to your daughter before anybody else does. Yeah. And that, I'm sorry, that just comes from my heart and gives me goosebumps, because, you know, I think a lot of girls you talk about getting gifts and feeling love. That's, anyway. Some of the younger victims, they've broken their relationships, say with their parents, their friends, you know, because the perpetrator makes sure that he pushes those people away from them. So in between the transition of them getting off the streets or out of the strip clubs and meeting with your group and getting some help, where do they go? Is there a shelter or something just for them?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting, because I think this is one of the reasons why the test partnership came into play, is that all the service providers were seeing folks in their agencies, right? And there wasn't really a dedicated program or anything like that we could go, okay, these are additional issues. So whether they were coming through the transition houses, whether we were seeing them in our youth outreach programs, the youth advocate program actually was a key agency that kind of helped tests actually get formed from the very beginning, because they were seeing it within the youth advocate program. So I think we're seeing it, agencies are seeing it all throughout. Here in Halifax, Stepping Stone is an amazing organization that works with just people who are sex trade engaged, and has been for about 30 years in this city. I think they just celebrated their 30-year anniversary. They have a lot of trust within the population and community, because that's the thing, is like when you're so isolated from everybody, and when you've been told also, there's like the part of that psychological manipulation is, I have eyes everywhere, I have people everywhere, if you go to this agency, I'm going to know you're trying to get help or trying to leave and stuff like that. So, and then of course we have our end state program with YWCA Halifax that is peer support. So we know that peer support is proven to be best practice for working with folks. And basically all that means is that we have folks with lived experience who've come out on the other end, who are basically like, I know, I've been there. I know I know what it's all about. Because when we as service providers say it, it isn't the same as coming from, like, if you're not part of the club, you're not part of the club, right? Like, and there's something very powerful about those peer relationships with folks to help them. And it's very much a harm reduction approach. This is well documented best practice. We meet people where they're at. We move them through, you know, we're there to walk alongside them with the stages of change. We do not subscribe to a save and rescue kind of approach to this issue. So that means our strategy needs to be that service providers in all of those agencies which they're coming to for other types of support, like food, like housing, that we're really well versed in knowing what extra supports are out there for folks to help them make that exit if they want to and if they're ready to. But if they're not ready to, ensuring that they're staying safe while they're, still engaged in it. So I feel like I might have rambled off the actual question that you asked. I hope I answered your question.
And I think we need to draw this conversation to a conclusion, unfortunately. But we have another speaker. So thank you very much, Charlene, for your presentation. I appreciate it. And people now know who you are and how to be in touch with you. And we just wish you all the best as you continue on with this very important work.
Yeah, and feel free to sign up for those advanced training modules.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we'll move right on to Heidi Marshall, who I see now has joined us. And Heidi, I'm going to turn it over to you. I don't know if you have slides or Krista's helping you with that or not, or you're just talking.
I have no slides.
Okay.
Hard act to follow, tough act to follow, that's Charlene always.
So Heidi, my job is to keep you on time. So we're going to let you chat with us for maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then we will go to questions. Okay, we're good with that?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay, thanks.
So I'm not sure if Charlene is still on or not, or if she's off.
I don't know. I don't see her.
No.
So she, once her presentation is done, we do demote back to attendee. I can certainly put her back in if
No,
you
that's
feel
okay.
it's.
That's okay. I just don't, I just wasn't sure if she was here to listen to the.
She is here to listen, yes.
Okay then. So I just want to take a little bit away from more than what to add on to what Charlene was talking about. Just about human trafficking. So just to introduce myself a little bit, my name is Heidi Marshall, and I am the human trafficking consultant for the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association. And right now we felt a need to develop a human trafficking strategy for the Indigenous communities in Nova Scotia. And so I work closely with Cheryl Geo as well. And I work closely with Charlene on this particular project in itself. And so I was also one of the founding members of the Jane Paul Indigenous Women's Resource Center, and a center for Indigenous women in the Sydney area who have experienced trafficking or live in high risk lifestyles with and are at the risk of being trafficked or are involved in the sex trade. So those are so I'm back at the center right now just to help out and filling in for Karen Bernard right now, and I am there right now actually. So if the girls because it's a storm right now, like the services are closed, but I am having a drop-in center. So if anyone does drop in for a taxi or something or a cup of tea, I have the chits on top of the desk and stuff in case they do drop in just to keep them safe. So I just want to let you know that Indigenous women and girls are 6 times more likely than non-Indigenous women to be victims of homicide or victims of becoming missing and murdered in this country. And there are a lot of risk factors that that Charlene also talked about. So Indigenous women are 3 times more likely to experience violence than non-Indigenous women. And so the RCMP estimates that between 1980 and 2011, 1,200 Indigenous women and girls have gone missing or been murdered in Canada. So, and that has prompted an inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So there's 231 calls for action with respect to that. And there's been so it was a long process. I was involved in some of the regional talks in Nova Scotia. And actually in the region, so because Nova Scotia Native Women's Association took the lead in that process. So it's estimated that 51% of trafficked women in Canada are Indigenous. Right now, it's very, very dear. One of my dear friends right now, his daughter is missing in Halifax. And as you can tell, there has been no media coverage about it. It's been quiet. Why is that? I mean, when Loretta Saunders was missing, there was lots of media coverage. Why do you think that was? Because she looks white. She was blonde, blue-eyed. This woman looks Indigenous. She was at a homeless shelter, and they are afraid that she's being trafficked right now. And I was speaking to some of my friends that are non-Indigenous. They didn't even know that she was missing. So I'm making posters myself. I got some posters made myself. I'm delivering to the father. I've been talking to the father now myself for several days. He's a good friend of mine. He's about my age. And it's very, very sad that there's been no media coverage. There's been no people helping with this. Why is that? A young girl is missing a mother, you know, and so we are afraid that she's being trafficked. I am working with the father right now, and I plan on contacting the human trafficking police when I get to Halifax this week. I am going to Halifax tomorrow for other work and stuff like that. But that's one of my biggest concerns right now. Why is that happening? Like Indigenous women are very vulnerable to the sex trade, and a lot of it are some of those factors that Charlene was talking about. But one of the biggest factors with Indigenous women being missing or murdered is the fact that we are Indigenous. Because being an Indigenous woman in this country today, you face many, many barriers. One is racism, big time racism. And actually, Indigenous women are targeted by traffickers and are disappeared and murdered because they are Indigenous and they are female. Simply being born Indigenous puts us at a high risk category, you know, because of the deep racism and the colonial practices that have happened in Canada, and also the sexism. So when you look at it, these disproportionate rates of violence are rooted in colonialism, in the colonial practices of the federal and provincial governments, and also the municipal governments. It's very important for like committees of yours to reach out to the Indigenous populations within your communities and within Halifax. It's an epidemic in Halifax. It's an epidemic all over Nova Scotia, just like Charlene was mentioning about. It's important for us and you to understand and think critically about colonialism and how that has affected our people, like the legislation and the policy that has been developed by this government, and this Canadian government has really put our women at risk. When you look at, we have to look at unpacking historical influences and contemporary experiences of Indigenous women and girls being trafficked. So my main concern right now, I'm not, I don't have all these this fancy PowerPoint or anything, but I want to speak from the heart and speak from my experience of when we first opened the Jane Paul Center. Our girls were being trafficked and were involved in a sex trade, and then there was no support for them. Once you're on the street as an Indigenous woman, you have no support from your community. You have felt abandoned not only by society of the non-Indigenous population, but also by your own communities. You have lost your children, number one. You have lost your value within your community. You have lost your cultural practices because you're using, and because you are now considered a prostitute or living a high risk lifestyle, working on the streets in Halifax or in Sydney or whatever. Then you are not allowed to no longer go to a sweat because of the protocol of the sweats of being sober. You're now no longer allowed to participate in our cultural practices and any ceremonies because you are tarnished now, because you're not good enough anymore. We have abandoned them ourselves. We have judged them ourselves. And so now they don't feel safe in our communities. So with the Jane Paul Center, we had to reestablish those relationships with our girls, with the women and the boy. But well, like now there's no place for boys, here in our communities as well. So the girl that's missing right now, she's a mother of, I'm not sure how many kids she has, but she's been missing now for 12 days or more. There's been nothing in the media. Why is that? It's really, there's nothing. We have to go around and do that ourselves, I'm going to go around Halifax when I get there handing out posters, hanging them up, going to homeless shelters, and we're going to be doing that ourselves, and there's no one helping us. The police aren't involved that much. So I'm going to try to, one of the chiefs that's on vacation called me from Jamaica and asked me to get involved. She said, reach out to the father, be like, we need to make this high profile. Like, we need to go out there and we need to, contact the media ourselves and stuff like that, So colonialism, as we know, remains in effect today. When you look at the Indian, like the historical discriminatory practices of the Indian Act still exist today. So if I married a non-Indigenous man prior to 1985, I would have lost my status. That means I can't come back to my community. If I'm in an abusive relationship, or if I am being like homeless, living on the streets prior to 1985, I can't go back home because I'm no longer considered Indigenous. And I think that, that's so I blame a lot of these colonial practices with respect to missing and murdered Indigenous women. That's one of the contributing factors, is that we were no longer considered Indigenous if we married outside of our communities. If we didn't marry an Indigenous man, we were no longer Indigenous. And there was lots of women that have fought this, like since the 1970s. And it was only Sandra Lovelace, when it went to the international courts and international law, that Canada was embarrassed internationally about their discriminatory practices within the Indian Act. Women could not even vote in elections under reserve as well. And so once we lost our status, and then when Bill C-31 came into effect, we didn't get our rights back automatically. You still had to apply. And it was up to your band council to accept you as a member of their band, and that's still in place today. So you can get your status back, but if the band doesn't want you as a member, then they don't have to put you on their membership list. Then where are you going to go? And people don't realize that, So, Indigenous women and girls, and plus the LGBTQ plus community within our community, are treated differently by these systems. They're treated differently by all systems. So that increases our vulnerability and contributes to the disproportionate rates of violence and sexual exploitation and trafficking of Indigenous women and girls. I know that, that there's underlying issues of poverty, mental health, addictions, but our girls are more vulnerable because they don't have any supports off reserve. And then they already feel abandoned and judged by their community members, by their community leaderships, by their health centers, by their child welfare system that's on reserve. So they have nowhere to go. The shelters, are usually not harm reduction, as we all know. Like there's rules, for with shelters. You got to come in by this time. You got to do that. You have to do that. So basically, so Europeans has portrayed Indigenous people as subhuman, inferior, and backwards. So what happened was Indigenous women and girls were historically framed as sexually available and placed in the lowest class of society. So this colonial hierarchy persists today. It still has an effect today. As an Indigenous woman, I don't feel safe going out at night. I'm here at the center right now. I'll feel vulnerable leaving the center because I know it's being looked at by Johns or by whoever's in the city out there looking for women. So they're predators, right? So this colonial hierarchy also still persists today and influences how the Canadian government operates, right? So when you look at the colonial violence against Indigenous women, it's always been sexual, and plus racism on top of it, so it's used to construct an image of Indigenous women to be as being acceptable, disposable, and targets for oppression. And so those are things, so basically, as you know, like slavery was also a form of sexualized violence. The average age of Indigenous slaves were like 14 years old, and 50% of them were girls. And so that's really, so for 2 centuries, remember, Indigenous women and girls and people were seen as property, being bought and sold as slaves. So that took away from a lot of our traditional practices once colonialism and European views of property came into effect, because before, prior to colonization, our people viewed women, like as nurturers, as the givers of life, and she was a highly respected within her communities. But as soon as European constructs of women became, dominant within our communities, then we lost our respect for our women, even within our communities. So basically we became property. And so we looked at that definition of woman and property within the European context. So basically, so this continuation of violence against Indigenous women happens today. So there's been a lot of relocation of Indigenous women and Indigenous communities, for instance, in Canada. So this continues today. Like we've been relocated by centralization. We've been relocated by residential schools. We've been relocated because of the Indian Act. And so basically, we've been forced into living in different areas when you couldn't go back to your community, forced into poverty, exploited by government and the RCMP and the police. So these histories of violence are kept hidden from society. And so I just want you guys to think a little bit about that. I'm not gonna, like, I've been speaking probably for 20 minutes now, and so basically, sexual exploitation and trafficking of Indigenous women are seen as part of the colonial violence in Canada. The violence that Indigenous women and girls face is so pervasive that violence has become a part of that package. It's so normalized within our communities, you know? And so that's another, so it's not a coincidence that Indigenous women and girls are 10 times more likely to be trafficked than non-Indigenous women and girls. This is a part of the enduring colonial, racist, and sexist constructs of Indigenous females as sexually available and sexually, sexually available, and therefore sexually viable. So those are things that we need to think about, and I think that Halifax, like, I'm really worried about that young girl. Like, it's been so long.
Yeah.
There's been no news media. There's been nothing, So basically, so I don't know, like, I'm hoping that she's going to go be okay. And I know I'm going to, start recruiting some people to come and help us put posters up this weekend in the Halifax area. And I think starting from the airport, I mean, like, like when you look at Truro, that's the hub of being trafficked, so where she, so I'm just hoping that she is okay. But the longer she goes missing, the less likely that she's going to be okay, And so basically, when you look at Indigenous women and girls and the statistics of our young people in care, for instance, they've been going to group homes, they've been, grooming, they're living in group homes. Once you age out of child welfare, then you go to group homes. So where are they at now? So, group homes are really they're targeted for, for sex trafficking, right? So when you look at poverty, histories of abuse, involvement in child welfare, and criminalization, all increase Indigenous women and girls to be vulnerable to exploitation and trafficking. That's so scary. And we have a very high percentage of Indigenous children in care right now. And so for example, a study of sex trafficking in Canada by the Women's Foundation, I have some stats here. 50% of victims were recruited between the ages of 9 and 14. 87.5 have been sexually abused before being trafficked. 71% reported being forced to have sex with doctors, 60% with judges, 80% with police, and 40% with social workers. 51% of traffic victims have been in the child welfare system, and a lot of our children are in the child welfare system. So Indigenous women and girls are already devalued by settler societies, further dehumanized if they're involved in the sex trade, which acts to make violence against them seem more acceptable. Because so these ideas are just not historical patterns. It still happens today. They're real beliefs of not only the perpetrators, but even the systems, right? And so even when you look at like I remember thinking like people are saying like, oh, she's only worth this much, she's only worth that much. Or even the girls that I know at the center saying, oh my God, you're so beautiful, to tell someone you're so beautiful, I can get this much for you, you know? Just conversations like that that's normalized. And so those are things that I'm concerned about. And there's a lot of victim blaming but I think that's societal norms. And I think that we need to make some differences within, like here within Nova Scotia. As Charlene said, Nova Scotia has a very high rate of human trafficking that you don't think. So once someone is lost, like Truro, they can go anywhere. Once you're on that highway and being shipped off somewhere, then it's really, really scary for our women.
Heidi, excuse me, Heidi. Do you think we could just pause there and ask some questions? Let the members ask you some questions or make some comments, and
yeah,
can we do that? We usually go around the table, take turns by Alpha. So I'm going to go to Haneen here and let her make a comment or ask a question here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Heidi, for that wonderful presentation. It was really informative, and it's really concerning to hear about the girl who's missing, and hopefully she's found soon. From my understanding from the presentation, it's quite obvious that there's a lot of institutional mistrust and distrust of institutions that are historically meant to help. And I'm wondering, in terms of what HRM can do, what do you think it can do considering the lack of trust that exists right now?
I think that what you can do is probably like say, for instance, this committee, maybe have a Mi'kmaq person on this committee. I know that Jane is Métis, but I think that we need to have someone from the Mi'kmaq community that's living in the rural area on this committee, and I think that'll try to start, that trust is there, not there, because this is like a very so I think that's really important. To invite a member either of the Friendship Center or someone in the rural area, no, I mean in the urban area, to sit on this committee. That's Mi'kmaq, number one, and I think that'll help break down some of those barriers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Moving on to Lily. Lily, do you have any comments or questions?
Oh, thank you so much, Heidi, for speaking from the heart to us. And I'll say I saw it on social media about the missing girl here in Halifax, and I initially thought it was a really recent, that she got missing really recently, and was so shocked when I saw that it was actually February 20th. So it's horrifying how little coverage there has been, and I only just started going around social media, and it's not anywhere else. So it definitely really very concerning, and I really hope that she is found. And I don't have any questions, but I appreciate Haneen's question and your response, and I really hope that we can get someone who's Mi'kmaq to join us on this committee.
And start reaching out to some of your Indigenous women or Indigenous people within, like the urban communities as well, and I think, that are some of your partners, and start collaborating with people. I think that's really important. I try to do a lot of collaboration, like with the YWCA, for instance, with the Ally Center, with the human trafficking police here in Cape Breton. I do a lot of collaboration, and I'm trying to reestablish those relationships right now. And so I think it's really important, for that, because, like the Jane Paul Center is here to keep our women safe, and you know, we saw the need for that, and it's been through a lot of trials and tribulations. Cheryl Jihu, I don't know if she's here with us,
Yep, she
but
is.
yeah,
Yep,
but
I'm here.
you know, okay, you know, but she was one of the founding members as well. You know, like she took it upon herself, like we had no money, and then she just said, let's just do this, you know. And I think, you know, I think that's so important. It went through a lot of growing pains, but it's doing good now, like reestablishing, like getting some funding at least, which is important, you know. And I think it just needed to get somebody at the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association that took like a, you know, made sure this was a priority. And I think that's so important because it's the first of its kind in like you know, east of Montreal, right? It's the only center for high risk women in east of Montreal, and that's so important. Like to know that, and it needs to be so. The profile of the Jane Paul Center also needs to be raised. Like no more people, and we need more centers like this across. Like in Halifax, they need like a Jane Paul Center for sure. Like you know, like an extension of 100%. There's so many Indigenous women that are on the streets of Halifax. They're living in homeless shelters, and then they're being targeted by traffickers. 100%, you
Thanks.
know.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Heidi. Joanne, do you have comments or questions?
I don't have any questions, but thank you so much, Heidi, for this presentation. We have a lot to think about it, and the non-Indigenous community has, we have so much we need to do. And so many people have claimed ignorance for so long. And I hope it's a good thing that people are starting. It's hard to say that you don't know about things anymore. So I hope that means that we'll all start working together and hand in hand with the Indigenous community and try and figure this out and start working together. So thank you for everything you've said today.
And 100%, I just think that also we need to realize that these women, like us as Indigenous leaders in this area, and also like, you know, us as Indigenous communities have also let these women down, you know. And so that's something that we have to fix as well, and we have to be more accepting, you know. So don't, you know, I mean, like, you know, like I know that, and then so that's starting to, you know, to take place, you know, like, you know. So once we knew that these women were being at risk, like 7 or 8 years ago, then we decided to open a center with no money, you know. And so it took them a long time to trust us, you know. So you know, but I understand, like in all other areas, you know, with respect to knowing about, you know, becoming allies with us and stuff like that is so important, because the more power, you know, like the more allies that we have, then the more power that we have to, you know, to fight these inequities.
For sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Iona, Councillor Iona Stoddard. Oh, sorry, excuse me. It's Holly's turn. Holly.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Heidi, for the work that you're doing, and you too, Cheryl. I did see the news of Marley missing in the Halifax community recently, and shared it, and hope she is found safe. Nothing to add. I think a lot to think about how we show up differently, and how we can be better supporters and allies, and turn words and thoughts to action. As mentioned by some previous folks, it's past time, so we have to do better. So thank you, and thinking of Marley and her family.
Thank you.
Thanks, Holly. And Councillor Stoddard.
Hi, Heidi. You spoke from your heart, and I really appreciate that. There's no sense buttering up or sugarcoating the facts.
Exactly.
You know, it's true. You know, as an Indigenous people, it's hard to believe that you're not more angry than you are. I mean, you are the original people, and you know, you've been stepped on and hurt, and we have to do a lot to make up for it. And I think, as someone said, once you know, you can't unknow it. So, you know, we need to work together to make things better for your people and for our people to work together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Heidi, I was just going to comment because I learned so much from what you said, you know, and I like the others appreciate that you spoke from the heart. That's really, really moving to me. I'm, as you mentioned, I'm acquainted with racism myself. So I grew up with, I experienced racism, and I've been very well informed, I thought, about the racism that Indigenous and Aboriginal women face in Canada. Followed that quite closely, experienced some of that. But it was the first time I realized that, as you mentioned, sometimes these girls that get on the outside are also experiencing some problems within their own community. They're not welcome within their own community. I had not thought about that or realized that at all. I was thinking it's all from outside. So these poor young women, it's from outside, it's from inside.
Yes.
It's that's so much to bear. So
yep.
I learned that today. I didn't want to learn that, but thank you. Thank you for that.
Like, it's just so sad, you know?
Yeah. And the work that you're doing with that center, with the Jane Paulson Center, I just want to commend you for that, and wish you all the best. It's tough work.
It is tough work, yeah.
Yeah, it's tough work. And then the other thing I just would say, Cheryl is here with us. Cheryl, do you want to, we have a little bit of time. Would you like to add any comments or share anything with us?
Sure. As Heidi mentioned, I did a lot of work within the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association before coming to work with the municipality. So this is very near and dear to my heart. I say that this all still continues within Halifax. We deal with it all the time at the Friendship Center. When we're hosting our youth groups, our grandmothers literally have to go out and shoo these men away that are trying to traffic our young women as they're coming out of their youth groups. And it continuously happens. We have Indigenous women showing up at the door at the Friendship Center, not even knowing how they got there. They've been trafficked from other areas, especially once the shipyard happened and other big developments happened. So it's a constant with the Indigenous community. And I think that we need to do more. And I think a good start for us to start looking at the missing, murdered Indigenous women's truth, the recommendations from the report, and seeing what we can do as a municipality and as a Women's Advisory Council to start addressing some of these recommendations that came out of the MMIG report.
100%. I just also want to give you an update. I just got a message from the Friendship Center to come to this Friendship Center, and we're going to start putting out the posters on set. We're going to go there this week and probably tomorrow. Fabian, the father, wants to do a media release. So we're going to help him with the media release this week. Maybe Cheryl, you want to, I don't know if you want to come up or not, we'll contact you anyway. They contacted Tina Roach, who used to be with APTN. They're going to put us in contact with the news, with a news anchor, and she's going to help with the media release. So whatever we can do to help out. And Maureen Google does media as well. So we're going to get on this week when I get to Halifax. So once we start working together, I think, that's something that we have to do anyway, I think, So I may be in Halifax longer than anticipated. Okay, thanks, Cheryl, for the work that you do as well.
Cheryl, can I just come back to, and also, I guess Heidi mentioned the recommendations, right? That came out of the report, 231?
Yes, calls for action, yeah.
Calls for action. And I'm just thinking out loud here, but kind of wondering if it might be something that we should be asking someone to come and speak to us about the specific recommendations that might be relevant to us in the city of Halifax.
So I actually just had the opportunity, I reached out to the National Native Women's Association of Canada and asked if they had kind of broken down some of these, because when you go through the documents and the recommendations, I was kind of looking to see if there was things that specifically would align with municipality work. And there hasn't been really any analysis done of it yet. And unfortunately, I'm just one person in the Indigenous Service Unit, and I'm hoping once we have another staff member on that we can dedicate some time to doing that kind of analysis and seeing what are some of the recommendations that we can, as a municipality, look at and implement.
Okay,
I think it might be, sorry, I think it might be worthwhile to contact the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association as well. Cheryl used to be their executive director prior to coming with you guys. And they do have MMIWG workers, and they do have people that are involved in working with the families and stuff like that. So I think that I may, you know, like, even if you concentrate on one call of action, that makes a difference. Do you know what I mean? What's, you know, so one call of the 231 will make a difference. You know?
Thank you.
That's
So Cheryl, we'll keep in touch with you too, and I like your suggestion as well, Heidi. But we'll keep in touch because as you become aware of things, of recommendations that we at the municipal level might be able to weigh in on, we'll look for your assistance there.
And there is also like some current council reports that reflect this as well. When you look at the Cornwallis Task Force report, they specifically cite some of the connections there in really building this relationship. And also along with the, as I mentioned before, we're working on a staff report about developing some friendship accords. And I think it might be very opportune if we look at exploring developing one between the Women's Advisory Council and the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association to ensure that there's that connect.
Yeah, good idea. Well, thank you for that.
Good.
Okay, I think our time for this topic is just about up, but anyone before we leave have anything they would like to conclude with? Heidi?
No, I just want to thank you guys for giving me this opportunity. I'm really, you know, just excited about the work that we're doing. And once the strategy is done, probably next year, the report will be done this year. We'll be happy to share it with everybody.
Thank you. We appreciate, I know Heidi's a very busy woman, and we appreciate that that you were able to squeeze us into your calendar.
I was glad no clients came to the center while I was doing this. I was waiting for them because I got the taxi chits ready. Yeah. All right, then. I'll thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Heidi.
Yeah.
Caroline, you know, my apologies, Caroline, because I think, Caroline, you were going to speak about Heidi and introduce her to us, and I just jumped ahead. I apologize for that. Anyways, turn the agenda over to you, because if there's any update or items or anything you'd like to remind us about with regard to International Women's Day, here's your chance.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. And no problem. I think Heidi did probably a much better job introducing herself than I could have done. So, so International Women's Day, I think late last week, Krista and the clerk's office would have shared an invitation with the committee. And that has the registration link and all the kind of details that you need to know to get to the right place to register for the Zoom event. And we're just, you know, we're finalizing our plans. The event is on March 8th, which is Tuesday. So we're just under a week out. And so our program is coming together. I've mentioned before that it's going to be co-hosted by Councillor Stoddard, as well as a person by the name of April Hubbard. And so we're expecting to have a few performances by local artists, by Guy Lee Johnson, and our keynote speaker is going to be Natil Batiste, who's the youngest elected member of the Acadia First Nation. I'm personally really looking forward to hearing from Natil. I had the opportunity to meet with her a few weeks ago just to hear kind of about what she was hoping to discuss, and I'm really, really excited to hear her speech. We also are going to have some interactive program content, just listening to the feedback that we received from the committee, and also hearing about kind of what our service provider partners are, hearing as well from their colleagues and communities, is that, folks do have a bit of Zoom fatigue right now. So we wanted to provide people with multiple ways to engage with the materials and the content. So there's going to be a spotlight on some really interesting projects, including a project around the experiences of women with disabilities and as it relates to gender-based violence, and also some really cool initiatives by local businesses that I think that you're all going to really like. And then last but certainly not least, we're going to have a panel discussion that's moderated by one of your members, Haneen Al-Naman, and it's going to be focusing on the impact of the housing crisis on women, girls, and gender diverse people. And that has a range of speakers. So we wanted to take a really intersectional view of the topic. We heard that housing was important from this committee, but we've also heard it from the planning group and our partners, our service provider partners. This is a very important topic right now. So we're going to have a member speak from Out of the Cold speak, Susie Hansen, who's an MLA for the NDP, representative from the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center. I believe her name is Monique. And we'll also have Arthi from the YMCA and disability activist Jen Powley. So we were going to be diving into this topic and looking at it from a lot of different lenses. And we're hoping to have a second performance. I can't speak to those details yet, but I think that you will really like it. We're hoping for, to give a little bit of a hint, we're hoping to have a poet come and join us, but we can't confirm the details just yet. And then we'll have some closing remarks from the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer, Denise Schofield. So yeah, it's going to be an exciting morning. It's going to be, some really good conversations. And I should have mentioned there'll be a few opportunities for folks to participate via question and answer. So, after the keynote, as well as after the panel discussion, we'll have kind of that interaction with residents and yourselves. So we're really hoping you can join us. And if you don't have the information or link yet, let me know. I can pop it in the chat box.
Thank you, Caroline. Sounds like a very, very full and exciting program. So I certainly encourage you. I got my registration in. I encourage the rest of you to, if you haven't done it, to register and to make time available to celebrate International Women's Day in the HRM. Okay, that brings us. Oh, well, sorry. Just want to make sure anybody has questions for Caroline. Well, good. Okay.
No, Madam
Sorry.
Chair, I'm going to
Yes.
depart the meeting right now. I just have another one to get to.
Yes, thank you for joining us, Cheryl. Nice to have you here. So I just, that brings us to Councillor Stoddard, who's going to provide us with a council update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, I have to apologize to you. I was saying that this segment of our meeting wasn't on the agenda, but for the first one, I wouldn't say the first time, but this was one of these times when I printed on the front and on the back, and I didn't flip it over. So there you go.
It happens. It happens.
Just a quick update. Went back to February 4th, one of our budget meetings. We did legal, finance, and human resources, and information technology. On the 8th, we had our regional council. We talked about Indigo Shores, Seaton and Lacewood Drive, regulations for taxis and accessible taxis and limos and the transit network. We also talked about getting rid of pre-employment polygraphs. I didn't even realize they still did that, but they're supposed to be discontinued September 3rd. So that was an eye-opener. Let's see, Councillor Outhit from Bedford was appointed to Planning and Development Standing Committee. Let's see, we talked about Center B package, disposable of surplus packaging, funding for the art gallery, Halifax Common Master Plan, land acknowledgements. Let's see, just see it up here. ANA Bicycle Network, active transportation, proposed expansion of the Rainbow Crosswalk program, rural active transportation again, consideration of front yard setbacks, and heritage considerations for 2267 Brunswick and 1266 Brunswick. Let me see. February 9th and 10th, we did legal budget. We did legal, human resources. And on February 9th and 11th, we did transportation and works. That was a full 2 days because that covered everything from, potholes to streets and sidewalks. And so that was good. And then we also did another day here, I think it was the second, we did corporate services, customer services, auditor general, and the CAO's office. So just quickly, February 15th, we had a regional council. We basically talked about bylaws and the quarries and how to make sure that they don't pollute the lands, and make sure we had the cluster housing that we wanted, so that's not spread out too far. We also had a presentation from Halifax Water. On the 15th, we did committee of the whole. We talked about small business definitions. So looking at being able to break up taxes between a smaller mom and pop shop compared to Costco. So, you know, they're kind of unevenly measured. So we're looking at that. February 16th, we did Halifax Transit and Recreation. Those are two big ones to do. The 23rd, we did HRP and RCMP. That was a lot. We had presentations, I think about 27 people presented to us before we started. March 2nd, we did fire safety and emergency, and we started on Halifax Public Libraries. So now, actually Friday, we're going to pick up where we left off at libraries and their budget. So, you know, we're getting there slowly but surely, and the end date is supposed to be April 12th, which happens to be my birthday, so that'll be great. So, you know, and if any of this information I read too fast, everything is online. You can go back, you can go forward. So, you know, if you missed something or something you might want more information on, it's there and it stays for a while. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you, Councillor Stoddard. We just appreciate hearing, you know, a little synopsis from you. That's helpful, and appreciate all your hard work on the council. We know it's a very demanding position, and we appreciate that you're there doing it.
Thank you.
That brings us, I think, to the end of our planned agenda. Are there any added items that any issues that people want to talk about before we call for an adjournment? If not, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
I saw motion.
So moved by Joanne. Okay, the meeting is adjourned. And wow, it's already March, and next meeting it'll be April. We'll be almost in springtime, and look forward to seeing you there. And thanks again for all your input on this meeting.
Great. Have a great evening, everyone. Take care. See you next time.
See you next time.
Bye, everyone.